Hi, friends. Welcome to the God and My Girlfriends podcast. We are so glad you're here.
Hi, Brandi. Welcome to the God and My Girlfriends podcast. It's so nice to have you.
Oh, I'm so excited to be with both you and Marcia today. Thanks for the invite.
I know I've been looking forward to it all week because we're old friends.
We're old friends. I'm like, I don't need to get nervous. This is like I'm sitting down and having coffee with someone I've known forever.
Do you have coffee? I mean, I have coffee.
Yeah.
Well, I've already had my coffee. I have my my energy drink, my happy juice.
Oh, good for you. I need
Now,
an energy drink.
I will say, Brandi, I didn't know you before Marcia talked about you. So I went out and, did a little bit of looking around, and it seems like we've traveled down some similar paths. So I felt like we had a lot in common. Just the leadership perspective and developing others, and the road you traveled through divorce. That's very familiar to me. So I feel like we have a lot in common.
Yes.
And I was looking forward to meeting you. And I'd love just to hear from you and let our listeners know just a little bit about you and what you're up to these days.
Yeah, I am a single mom of 3 sons who are 22, 19, and 17.
Oh, I can't believe it.
I knew when I started to say, I was like, oh, Marsha's going to cringe, because when you see someone with babies and then you hear their baby is 22, you're like, what has happened at 22 years? He graduates college this spring, so that's super exciting to get. I have 2 in college, so it's nice to only have 1 in college next year. I live in Franklin, Tennessee, so I'm close to Marcia. Have been here for 23 years. It's definitely home to me. I work full-time with an organization called Leading and Loving It that exists to help female leaders thrive and lead strong in ministry. And I have been part of that for 15 years. I also say my single mom side hustle. I work as a certified coach. I work with a lot of women who have ministry background and are trying to navigate leadership and what that looks like in the church or nonprofit. And then I also work with a lot of women who are navigating divorce and kind of starting life over in a way that they never expected to experience. So those are my 2 main gigs. I did just author a book that was published in July, which I'm super proud of. It's kind of like my 4th child, called Better Than Okay. So I also get to now say I'm an author, which feels out loud.
Yes, yes. I loved, being on the God and My Girlfriends podcast, because I read one of the reviews for you, and it was someone who said it's like of you. It's like having a best girlfriend in your corner supporting you.
Those are my favorite compliments. That was my heart with the book, is just to be that person that could help validate the emotions and the experiences that they are walking through in divorce, and to really just share like the really, really rotten and say, yes, I have also been there. And there is a future where you will be better than okay.
I love that. I've been through actually 2 divorces, and they sucked. And so I wish I'd have had your book as I was going through mine. I will say what I find so compelling about your book, and I don't know if you meant to do this or not, but even if you haven't walked through a divorce, we have all experienced loss of some kind. And so I think that anyone could really find a lot of value in how to work through some sort of loss or grief with your advice in the book. And so thanks for doing that, because it really does have a very much wider reach, I think, than, and I don't know if you meant to do it that way, but it definitely does that.
Well, initially, I kind of wanted to have a wider reach. And then the publisher was like, I don't know, your story of divorce is so strong. It was kind of unintentional, intentional, because in
Yeah.
the back of my head, I was like, gosh, anyone who experienced loss can walk through something like this. I actually, within a month of the book releasing, I had a friend of mine from high school who's a gay man and lives in Kentucky still reach out, and he just said, like, I've never been married, I've never been in, you know, a super serious relationship, but I've lost both of my parents within the last 5 years, and this book helped me walk through the grief of what it's like to
Mhm.
lose both of
Mhm.
my parents, and how to walk through that in a way that I am going to be better on the other side. So compliments like that, and people who, because, you know, my audience is mainly women, so it's nice to know that it impacts other readers who have different experiences than just divorce.
I know. I bet that did mean a lot to you. And it does, I can totally see that. So let's dive into this book, shall we? It's so
Let's do it.
good. And
Please.
I'm going to just start. I'm going to read a quote that jumped out at me, and it is about grief. It's from chapter 4. And this is the quote: Time doesn't heal grief. We hear all that, right? Everybody's like, oh, it's time. No, time doesn't heal grief. That was a powerful statement. Healing heals grief. And your healing will look different from others' healing. Time doesn't heal grief. It's your courage to deal with everything you used to avoid. It's your bravery to give attention to your pain and address all you've been bottling up. It's your dedication to working through the tension that has held you captive and kept you bent for far too long. Be patient and don't compare your journey to others. There is so much good advice just in that one quote. Um, and so, what kind of advice would you give to someone who maybe is grieving something right now and they need to take like that first step toward healing? Because it's the healing process that really helps us move past and into a healthier place. Uh, do you remember a first step that you took?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like everything felt like a first step, you know, when you're starting over at 42 and you're experiencing a divorce that you never saw coming. Everything felt like a first step. I think my first piece of advice would be just give yourself the time to feel the grief. I feel like lots of the time, or the reason we can't find the healing we're searching for, is because we've hurried ourselves through grief.
Mm,
And and lots of times our friends, I know I've been a friend who has had someone in my life grieving, and because I love them and I hate to see them hurt, I have said to them, like, hey, let's do this, and try to get you down that path of healing journey. So I think if you're a friend of someone who's grieving, if you're the person grieving, take time, give yourself the time you need to actually feel everything that's going on in your body, in your heart, in your soul. In order to heal it, you have to feel it. So it has to start with experiencing all the emotions that goes with that grief.
mhm.
As far as taking that first step, that's where I think you have to be super self-aware and reflective of what actually, you know, gives you life, what helps move you forward. I know for me, one of the first steps I took was a regular yoga practice. And part of that was for my body, and the other part was for my mind, because I
Mm.
so tend to ruminate and repeat scenarios in my head. And you know, I'm the person who wakes up in the middle of the night and I future forecast the next 15 years, and they're never good scenarios. I was going to give you one of my scenarios, but I'll just say they're never good scenarios. It's always worst case.
Mhm.
But for me, I would go to a 75-minute yoga class twice a week. And not only did that help my body release some of the emotion I was feeling, it was so hard physically on my body that my mind had to tune in and connect with my body. And it didn't give me time to think of everything that was going wrong in my life. So there were
Wow.
times I would do this 75-minute yoga class and get to the end when we're, you know, laying in savasana, relaxing, quote unquote. And I'm laying there on my back, relaxing with tears streaming down my face, because that combination allowed me to release a lot of what was going on in my life. Now, yoga is not it for everyone. So I think you have to figure out what is the next best step for you toward healing. I do think doing something physical is super beneficial because, as you guys know, I'm sure the body keeps score and the body does
Mhm.
measure what has gone on in our lives emotionally. So doing something physical allows the mind body connection in a way that allows us to process differently. I would also find a great therapist. That would be the step that I would recommend for just about anyone, is find a really great therapist. Don't discount therapy. Look into finding a great therapist who can really help you process those emotions. That's not easy for everyone.
Mhm.
I still at times have, my therapist told me a couple of weeks ago, she said, instead of you finishing our sections and saying, okay, I'm going to fix that, I would love for you to just feel it a little bit, because I tend to
Mm.
want to fix instead of feel. So I think finding
Ooh.
a great therapist who can lead you toward that healing is also very, very beneficial.
Wow, yeah. two really good first steps. Absolutely.
I
But
hear Enneagram in that a lot. I hear,
I'm
feeling,
a
thinking, and
fan.
doing.
Yes, I am a fan of the Enneagram. I'm an enthusiast. I'm
mhm.
not certified yet, but
Yeah.
I think coming in my future.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I hear is for those of us that do get stuck in our heads and in our thought process, and what we say to ourselves is, I just need to think about this some more. I just need to think about it some more. It'll become clear. But
Yes.
that's not the case. So you have to it kind of come at it in a different way. So the way that you've partnered that physical activity is just such a great uh, way of seeing that in action.
And I think
Mhm.
that was language that wasn't really used when I was a kid and anywhere. It wasn't necessarily used in my home. It wasn't used at school. It wasn't, even when the guidance counselor came in every 2 weeks for 45 minutes or whatever, I don't remember us really talking about feelings and digging in. And then for it to be safe to talk about feelings, those were kind
Mm.
of the things you didn't talk about. So, it's new for a lot of people to really dig in and feel what's going on inside of them.
Yeah, that takes me to another quote that I saw that is about transparency. And maybe you can talk, this is a good segue into that topic, because the quote says, "Rarely do we feel brave in a moment of true transparency, but choosing transparency will be one of the bravest things that you do."
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about how that felt when you started down that path of transparency?
Yeah, I think one of the things I always like to distinguish is the difference between being authentic and being transparent. Because I believe I am supposed to be authentic wherever I am and whoever I'm with. So if I'm at Kroger shopping for groceries, if I'm at a Friday night football game for one of my kids, if I am teaching, if I am having coffee with a girlfriend at the coffee shop down the street, I am called to be Brandi, authentic wherever I am. That is easier for a lot of us than being transparent. For me to really open up and share with my best friend who lives in Vegas, her name is Lori, for me to open up and share with her what was really going on in my life and to be transparent was difficult because in saying it out loud, you're acknowledging it's actually true. You
Mm.
can't function in denial when you say it out loud. So I'll never forget calling her in June of 2016 um, and just saying like, hey, my marriage is in shambles. It's been bad. It's been way worse than what I have told you it is. And, my husband has chosen to move out. And having to have that conversation and say it out loud, whoa, that meant it was real. So I think in choosing that transparency, it actually allows us to help other people and our community to come in and love us in a way that helps with that healing. I went from being surrounded by thousands of people every weekend as a pastor's wife at a really large church, one of the fastest growing churches in America, to only talking to 3 people and my therapist on a regular basis.
Mm.
I lived a life where I would go to the grocery store and put my hoodie up on the sweatshirt I was wearing because I didn't want anyone to ask me what was going on because I didn't have answers to all of their questions. And then I'd drive home and put the garage door down and go to the second floor and hide out up there. So if anyone knocked on my door, I could pretend like I wasn't at home. So I went
Mm.
from literally being surrounded by thousands of people to being pretty isolated. But the one thing I did not give up were those 3 close friends and my therapist. And those are the people I knew I could be transparent with. And because of the history we had together and the way they were showing up for me, I knew I could trust that in being transparent and vulnerable with them, that I was also safe in that friendship.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That um there was another quote about community and how important that is in your book. And of course, that's what God and My Girlfriends is all about, is trying to help women break down the walls that sometimes keep us from being authentic and transparent with one another as friends. I'm going to read this quote real quick. It says, "Leaning into community isn't always easy. I fully believe we are all created with a desire for community and connection. My community is one of the biggest blessings in my life. When my life fell apart, the only place I felt safe was with a small group of 3 people, people you were just talking about. I talked to them on a regular basis. I went from being surrounded by thousands of people as a church leader to being isolated and having communication with only a handful of people. Often during a traumatic season of life, we choose to isolate out of fear, shame, embarrassment, betrayal, and even exhaustion. Our souls are bruised, and having conversation about our pain is often draining. However, God didn't create us to walk through life alone. 100%, I agree with that. We have to rely on other people to help get us through. But there is a balance, like, you know, what you were just talking about, how some days you just had to isolate. You had to just go in your house and you had to shut the door
Yeah.
because I'm sure you're dealing not only with your own grief and your own emotions, but your three boys.
Mhm.
And as someone who knew you in the role as that mega church, huge church pastor's wife, from the outside looking in, you just seemed to thrive in that role. I mean, people loved you. We all loved Brandi. I mean, you were just such a light. You were like the mother of everyone in that church, and then to have suddenly have that ripped away from you and then wondering, and I'm sure you had tons of people like reaching out, like, what do you need to do? But you had to dial it back and you had
Mhm.
to figure out just a few people that you could feel safe with.
Mhm.
So I know sometimes a lot of people wonder that how can I figure out who are my safe people? Um, how did you, first of all, how did you figure that out? How did you find your three trustworthy people that you could be completely transparent with?
Mhm. All of those people had been in my life for a significant amount of time.
Okay.
So I think that is important. Some of them had been in my life longer than others, but they had all been in my life a significant amount of time in order for me. I was told once by a great therapist named Jim Kress that trust is time plus believable behavior. So there was a significant amount of time that they had been in my life. They also had behavior that supported that they were safe. So when I put
Mm-hmm.
those two things together, I'm able to trust them and to know that these are people I can lean on. These are people who are going to show up for me. Those are the people I would say, and one of them corrected me one time because I would say, like, besides God, it's my support system that got me through it. And she said, can we also acknowledge you did a whole lot of hard work in therapy and
Mm-hmm.
intensives and that kind of stuff? I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, you're right. But my support system was just so huge to me. I am a 2 on the Enneagram. So we are created for connection and community. And I believe that 2s have a double dose of that. So for me, in order to be able to function, community was super important to
Mm-hmm.
me. Be able to
Mm-hmm.
have healthy connection in my life was important to me.
Mm-hmm. But you also, I think it is okay. I mean, isolating isn't good. I went through a depression last year, and yeah, you just wanted to, you don't want to go exercise. You don't want to, everything that's really good for you is like, you don't want to do it for some
Sure.
reason. I don't know why it works that way. Um, but eh, like you just said, we choose to isolate out of fear, shame, embarrassment. That's kind of how I was doing with my depression. Like I was embarrassed that I wasn't acting normal. And your friends, when you're going through grief, like when my parents passed away,
Yeah.
I think our culture doesn't know how to deal with someone grieving.
Yeah.
And you want to support your friend that's going through a loss, right? But at the same time, you want your friend back to normal. Like in a selfish way, you like, I just want you back. And so you sometimes I think we end up trying to rush our friends through the grief process because you want your friend back. It kind of
Yeah.
makes sense
Sure.
because you're not the same. So I would love for you to just speak for a minute to like that. Like if you know someone that's going through a loss, like did it how did you feel when people would reach out to you? I mean, that weren't in your close circle. Like, did it, did you want people to reach out to you, or did you just want to be like left alone? Or, how can we walk through somebody that's going through that process as their
Yeah.
friends?
I always appreciated the text messages that would say, like, no need to respond to this.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because I think you are so overwhelmed when you're walking through a season of grief or depression. And I understand what you're talking about, Marcia. 2023 was not a great year for me either. I was really glad to see that one end and had some depression myself. And I
Oh.
remember finding myself thinking, like, telling my girlfriend Lori, like, there's nothing that has made me feel less better than okay than writing a book called Better Than Okay. Something is wrong with me. It ended up being some depression that, I was just dealing with some stuff. I would say I was healing at a deeper level.
Mm.
Because I was rewalking through a lot of those emotions. So I think we do want to hurry those people through grief. And I think, one of the things I will say that Lori always did for me is she never pushed me
Mm.
um, to hurry out of my grief. She gave me the space I needed to grieve. The other thing I think is super important is when we are friending someone, loving them well, being a good friend to them who is walking through grief, I think it's good to give them options of how we can help. For instance, I talk in the book about a group in my life called the Six Pack, and we are 6 moms whose kids played football together from 6th grade to 12th grade. And actually always knew one another, but kind of became bonded over the course of my divorce. They knew what I was walking through. It was pretty public, as you alluded to, but
Mhm.
what started happening was one of them realized that I might not have a place to sit. I had always gone from sitting with family for 20 years. I'd sit with family at events for my kids to I was walking into events alone.
Mm.
And one of them started reaching out, and she would say like, hey, do you want me to meet you at the gate to walk in together? Do you want me to meet you at the tailgate that happens before the game? Or do you just want to see me inside of the stadium? And she gave me options of what worked best for me. So in the
Oh, I
midst
love that.
grief and trauma and trying to just navigate and get my head above water, she was also allowing me to make a choice. And there's a lot of power in being able to make a choice. It also pushed me to reflect and ask myself, what do I need? You know
Mm.
what? I don't want to walk in alone. So yes, I need you to meet me at the gate.
Mm.
And she would meet me at the gate. We would walk in together. We'd meet the other 6. And throughout that year, it became all 6 of us ended up walking in together and tailgating together. And it was truly a gift. It was a friendship ordained by God. We still get together on a regular basis. I was just with a couple of, some of them have moved and that kind of stuff, but I was with a couple of them 2 weeks ago.
Aw.
And that friendship has, lived the longevity of I can trust these people because they have shown up for me in the past. And
Mhm.
if something were to happen in the future, I know they would show up for me then. So I think giving the person who's grieving choice, whether it is, hey, do you want to meet me out at a restaurant? I can bring food and drop it off at your doorstep, or I can bring food over and we can have dinner together at your house. And giving them the choice of options
Mm.
actually empowers them.
I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That's great advice.
I'd like to ask you a little bit about that intersection between megachurch life and what you walk through, because megachurch can bring mega pain, I imagine.
It can.
um, and I end up working a lot with women who, on top of navigating a divorce, have to go through that ministry component in church and community where things just start unraveling all over the place. And one of the things that you said is that um, heartbreak prompts your soul searching and can be a catalyst for your closeness to God. And I'd love to hear a little bit about how how God's presence and how your interaction with God became, different during that time.
Yeah. Yeah. And Marcia touched on this. I loved being part of a mega church. I loved being the pastor's wife. I really did. I kind of thrived in that role. Because to me, it wasn't, I don't see people as large groups. I see people as individuals. So I loved loving on the staff. I loved checking on them. I loved hosting the women in my house on a regular basis. I loved having staff over. I loved hugging necks on Sunday morning. And I will say I felt like God healed the grief of losing my ex-husband because he turned out to not be the person I thought he was. He healed that grief in my life and my heart quicker than he did the loss of the church. And I'm not even going to use the word mega church there. The church for me just represented so much community and life change and community change. And it was a calling I felt like God had placed in my life to be able to serve at that level. Now I attend currently a micro church, which is a house church model. So I meet with 22 people on Sunday mornings, and once a month the 5 houses that have churches get together, and there are about 115 of us, and we have a macro. But I like to joke and say I'm a mega church girl living in a micro church world. Um, I think one of the things that was super revealing to me is that for me, the issue was not the church, the issue was the person. So the clarity God gave me in this isn't the church that has hurt you. This is the person who has led the church and pretended to be something he's not. That is who has hurt you. And I do think it's provision of God that 2 of my best friends, Lori, who I talked about in Vegas, and my friend Lisa in Florida, both of them are mega church pastors' wives, and both of their husbands are authentic men who lead with integrity. They're men of high moral character. And I needed those people in my life in order to not just pin this on a position, but to pin it on a person. Now, I also know that there's a lot of hurt that comes from large churches. For me, that was not my experience. When I even moved into this house, the creative team came over and they put up a basketball goal that I had at my last house so my kids could have the same basketball goal that they had left. I had several of the men come over and they helped demo this house so I didn't have to pay construction workers for demolition. They came and dedicated several days of their time to help do that. They continue to show up for me. Now, I also realized that I had to move on. That as much as I love that church and still cheer that church on, and as only God could orchestrate, the senior pastor now, his name is Kevin, his wife's name is Ree, their son, their 3rd child, oldest son, and my 3rd child, youngest son, are thick as thieves. And he is in my house all the time, and they are dear friends. They play football together. Durham will actually be Brewers center next year and stand in front of him on the
Oh,
football
how cool.
protection. So, I feel like that is a God orchestrated thing. But leadership is tough. And it doesn't matter if you're leading 10,000 or you're leading 10. I've seen it in my micro church. Leadership is tough and people get hurt, and we are dealing with humans, and sometimes those humans bring pain into our lives unintentionally. I think for me, when I lost so much and I went from being surrounded by thousands to only talking to 3 people, man, I had a lot of free time to talk to God. And all of those conversations were not necessarily pretty. They had lots of cussing and yelling and screaming and questioning and doubt. And I would say for me, I was able to create a secure attachment with God. I'm pretty anxious and would function in an anxious attachment and relationship. And walking through my divorce and the security that my relationship gave me, the security my relationship with God gave me, allowed me to actually connect with him in a way I hadn't been able to before. So it is really easy being the pastor's wife of a successful church to ride the coattails of a successful husband or a successful church. And those coattails weren't there anymore. So if I was going to continue this relationship with God, man, I was going to have to dig in and figure out, well, what does a relationship between me and God look like? So I've been a follower of Christ since I was in 3rd grade, 9 years old, and accepted Christ with Brother Bill Gross at Fredonia First Baptist Church. But it was at 41, 42 where I allowed that relationship to take on this friendship, a reverence, and also a friendship, a level of honesty that had never existed before, a questioning that I never allowed myself to do before, and to really be able to feel the presence of God in my life that changed that relationship that I have with him today.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because it speaks to that transparency,
Yes.
and just the power of lament,
Yes.
and being free to express emotions, in a world. Now, first of all, the world itself is not really comfortable with that, but also in evangelical circles, it's also not a very comfortable thing to
Yeah.
do, to be emotional. So yeah, that speaks a lot, I think, to me and to women like me who do have to figure out, where is God in this whole thing, and how does my relationship now shift? How does it need to shift to walk into this next chapter feeling whole and feeling connected to God? Yeah. So thank you for writing that. It's really, really
Hmm.
poignant.
Thank
Yeah, I
you.
think that is part of the healing process. Is for me, sometimes it's easy to get stuck in the blaming stage, like I'm hurt and it's this person's fault, or it's this church's fault, or it's whatever.
Mm.
And moving past that, for me, it took focusing on God and letting God shift that. It's like, okay, those people hurt you, or this situation hurt you, but all humans are just flawed, and being able to go back and just remind myself that God's got this and that He can help me heal. I do think we have to have a therapist and we have to have a community. I mean, we have to use all of the tools in order to heal. But I think having a good spiritual connection with our Creator,
Yes.
for me, like even through the depression episode last year, I had to have all of it in order to kind of come out of it and be able to let go of the pain and the shame, and the blame and everything else. And you give some really great tools in this book, I think, that, like I said, could help people walking through all kinds of loss. Um, and almost all of us are walking through some sort of loss these days, it
Yes.
seems like.
Yep. I
Yeah.
agree.
And I love that, the book also talks about what's next, because that grief process culminates with that new meaning that we find in life. And so one of the things that you encourage folks to do is to really not only be truthful, but to dream, to find ways to dream again. So what does that look like for you in this chapter? How are you dreaming?
Yeah, it's so funny you would say that, because that is something I have made myself dial back into for 2024. And I actually just did, I sat down this week and was working through, I don't like the word goals. I'm just not super businessy, and everybody talks about goals, and it's my flaw. I tie those to business. So I would rather talk about dreams, and I just did some of that. And one of my dreams is about expanding my business, and I have a course coming um, that's going to release this fall, and it's called I Survived a Narcissist. Um, Leading
Oh,
with and living with a narcissist. So I'm going to release that this fall. I definitely want to be able to I love coaching one-on-one with people. So I'd love to grow that arm of my business. I think there's something to be said about just being able to sit down and validate people and help move them through this process of starting over. And I like to say helping them find their best next step, because we end up in a lot of areas where we feel stuck in life. So I'd love to grow the coaching arm of my business. I have another couple of courses that are bouncing around in my head. I have a journaling prayer book idea for single moms. So yeah, and ultimately I dream about when I find my husband and what that's going to look like. I'd love to, be in a permanent relationship again with the person that God has chosen for me. So I am definitely dreaming about what that looks like in my life, and then also launching my kids into adult life. That is something it's my first time doing it, Marcia. So you are going to have to help me navigate it. But I dream about just helping them get started, and how I can continue to parent them in this next season of life and what that looks like.
I mean, you were pregnant with Gage when I met you, and I just can't even believe it. Like, he's in
I
college,
was.
Jet's about to graduate. So Brewer's the only one home with you full time
He's
right
the
now,
only
huh?
one at home, and he's the easiest. And almost every day, I'm like, "Thank you, God, for giving me the easiest last."
Oh, that's good. No, you are such an inspiration of, like, I'm sure at some point you just had to sit down and go, okay, it's up to me to create a life I'm going to love now. You're
Yeah,
right. And
yeah.
you seems like you've done that. I mean, all of us have days where you're like, okay, this is not
Oh,
what
for sure. I
I
think there's this realization of like, okay, my life has fallen apart. The good news is I get to put my life back together the way I choose.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of power in that of, okay, I get to choose. And I would say I live what could be described as a simple yet really warm, cozy life that I have created. And I'm very grateful for that.
I know it's it's great. I'm so proud of you.
Mhm.
So we're going to put all of the stuff in the show notes, people, your website, so they can find you if they want to find out more about your coaching. We're definitely linking to this awesome book. And we've been doing some book giveaways. So yours may be one of the next giveaways here along
Oh,
the
I
way.
love
So
that.
yeah, and yeah, and also Leading and Loving It. I don't want to gloss over that. That's a great
Mhm.
nonprofit that you helped start with Lori, right?
Yes, Lori had started that as part of an extension of her church. And then when she realized there were a lot of other pastors' wives out there looking for the same thing, I came on board and helped her get it kind of off the ground and launched at a larger scale. So,
Right.
yeah.
So it originally started to help specifically pastors' wives because that's such a niche thing. Like, but then
Yes.
you expanded it. Like any woman in ministry or
Yeah.
leadership really could benefit.
Well, we started realizing the struggles are the same.
Yeah.
Like whether you're married to a pastor or you're in charge of, creative at your church,
Hmm.
a lot of the struggles and the questions women ask were exactly the same. So we definitely still have a cohort that we do for senior pastors' wives, but everything else is geared to that female leader in the church or Christian nonprofit.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you have a big retreat in October every year in
Yes,
Las
we do
Vegas.
our conference in October. It's 22nd and 23rd of 2024.
Oh, and so you've already got it planned. I bought
I'm
tickets to
gonna
go a
get you
couple
there
of years
one year,
ago. I
Marcia.
know. I actually had a ticket and was going to go like 2 years ago, and then I had a tour popped up and I couldn't go. I was so bummed, but I definitely want to come out there one day because I know that that's a great weekend and y'all are doing great work. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Brandi Wilson, you are a sweetheart, and I'm so glad to see your face. And thank you for spending time with us today.
Thanks for having me. It was great to meet you, Stacy. Always wonderful to see you, Marcia.
Yeah, and we got to do a face to face soon.
Yes, yes, let's make it happen.
Thanks, girl.
So
Have
good
a
to
good
meet you.
day.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Isn't she delightful? I love her.
Absolutely. Yeah,
I'm glad
definitely was a great
she
conversation and just weaved
Mhm.
together some wonderful topics for us. Leadership, the divorce journey, just being authentic and transparent. Those were some really great themes.
Yeah, she's got some really great, really helpful stuff in the book, and it's an easy read. It's like kind of half memoir and half, sometimes some books I read, they're almost too clinical and it's just, I get bored, but her stories are great to read. She's so relatable. So thanks again to Brandi Wilson.
Yeah. And we have another great guest on the horizon. So we're going to take a week off. And then when we come back, we're going to have Leah Sims
Mm-hmm.
join us. And I've known Leah for a few years now, and she is someone who she's an author, so she has that going for her. She's big into women's ministry, and she wants to come and talk to us a little bit about how she sees the Holy Spirit working with women in church leadership. I know that she is very purposeful in how she makes and keeps friends, and she belongs to a group called the Sisterhood. And I think that'll be an interesting thing to consider,
Ooh,
and
I like
also
that.
what her own deconstruction and reconstruction journey is. So I look forward to you meeting Leah and to our listeners meeting Leah.
I look forward to that too. So, yeah, we will be off next week, but make sure you come and join us again. And we'll see you in 2 weeks on the God of My Girlfriend's podcast. Bye, everyone.
Bye.